Okay, the last thing I mentioned is 2014 is an election year. Like it or not, it always impacts the legislative process. Just very quickly, 2014, there's a congressional race, a hot one in northern Arizona, and that is Ann Kirkpatrick, the incumbent, CD1. The Speaker of the Arizona House, Mr. Tobin, Andy Tobin, is running for that, trying to become the Republican nominee. How he is Speaker of the House and campaigns up in a very large rural area remains to be seen. And he has an opponent in his own Republican primary that's a colleague of his, a very, very conservative Tea Party guy named Adam Quasman, and they're expected to snipe at each other constantly during the legislative session. I don't see the legislative numbers changing much as a result of this election. I think it will still be a heavily Republican legislature because there are just very few competitive districts now. They're either all solid Democrat or solid Republican due to reapportionment, and I think that's what, at the state level, the legislative makeup's going to be about the same. With regards to other races, of course, the governor's race is the big one. There's only one Democrat running right now by the name of Fred Duval. It looks like he's going to be unopposed in the Democratic primary, whereas in the Republican race there are now 8 candidates, 8 of them that are running, from the Treasurer, Doug Ducey, to the Secretary of State, Ken Bennett, to the Mayor of Mesa, Scott Smith. And there's many other people, the former general counsel of GoDaddy.com, Christine Jones, the state senator Al Melvin, the former county attorney who is disbarred now, Andy Thomas, is running. There's a new candidate in the race, a former congressman from California that has just jumped in. That has lived here about a decade. He's into charter schools management. He's running. So you got 8, I left somebody out, but you got 8 Republicans running. Let me real quickly, as the governor says, do the math. There's 1 million registered Republicans in this state. There'll be about a 25% turnout in the August primary. So there'll be about 250,000 total votes. You got 8 candidates. Somebody's going to win that thing with 50,000 votes. Very interesting. That, normally you'd say Doug Ducey, Ken Bennett, Mayor Smith, one of those guys is going to win. But who knows, with the spread of so many candidates, could an Andy Thomas, who's running with clean elections, public financing, he'll get $800,000, he won't have to raise a dime for the primary? Could he go around the state and get populist type people that he says he was ganged up on in the bar hearings, and that he's running against the establishment in a conservative Republican primary? Could he get 50,000 votes and win? I can tell you Fred Duval hopes he does. but who knows what will happen in that game. Secretary of State's race is fascinating. There's 3 Republicans running. 2 Democrats running. The new name that jumped in a couple weeks ago that's most well known is Terry Goddard on the Democratic side. And for Attorney General, you have the incumbent Tom Horn, who's got Republican opposition from Mark Brnovich, the former gaming director, who was a former AG attorney as well. That'll be a messy primary with all the controversy around Tom Horn. And then you have for the Democrats, so far unopposed again, Felicia Rodolini, who lost to Horn by 3 percentage points the last time 4 years ago, and she's just hoping those 2 Republicans chew each other up and spit each other out, and she's waiting there for them in the general election. When Napolitano suddenly left Arizona, she left the Democratic Party with zilch, basically. The bench was pretty weak. It's really quite amazing that 6 years later, you have Fred Duval, you have maybe Terry Goddard or Leah Landry Taylor, probably Goddard, and Felicia Rodolini as a threesome ticket for those top 3 slots. That's pretty strong, considering where the party was in the first place. But for you Democrats in the room, just to put a damper on what I just said, off-year elections that are not presidential elections, the turnout goes way down. And Republicans turn out better than Democrats. That's the track record in Arizona. And so while the Republicans lead Democrats by 5 points in registration, in off-presidential election years, that 5-point lead goes to 7 or 8 points. So even with good candidates running and battered and bruised Republicans that come out of vicious primaries, it's still a long slog for Democrats to win statewide offices. They basically have to win over 60% of the registered independents to make up the registration total. That's why amongst all the statewide offices, governor, secretary of state, AG, treasurer, superintendent of public instruction, and the 5 corporation commission seats, how many Democrats are there in those?
0.
Nothing, not one. That registration edge is there. The registered independents, those that choose no preference and want no party, they are the largest growing group of registered voters. They're now at 34% of the registered voters, independents, and rising dramatically. The two parties are coming down every year. Republicans are at 35%, Democrats are at 30% and decreasing. And the tiny little 1 or 2% left are the tiny little parties, Libertarian, Green Party. So independents, that is the trend. But they don't vote in primaries usually. They can vote in one of them if they so choose. They don't usually choose to do so. And so they're only in the game in the general election. And by then, you've usually got a very conservative and a more liberal person running, and a lot of people believe centrists or moderates are left out of the picture, which tend to be the majority philosophy of independents, and they don't really have a centrist to choose from, supposedly, in the general election. That's part of our primary party process that might have been corrected if the top 2 primary system that California and Washington now have, if that had been adopted, but it wasn't. Part of the reason was darker money, which we'll see a lot of in 2014. I'm going to stop right there. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I think we've got a few minutes. Yes?
Well, you talked about dark money and the rise of that as being a big player in the coming elections. The other big unknown is there going to be a rise in white money with the new campaign contribution limits? Because they just went up so radically. The big question is, are people who are used to ponying up $50 or $100 for a legislative or gubernatorial campaign really going to give $5,000?
Yeah, great question. I didn't have time to even get into this. The legislature, the Republicans did pass, and the governor signed instantly, a bill that allowed for the contribution limits to dramatically go up. For legislative races, 9-fold it went up. You could only give $440 total to a legislative candidate for the primary and general election. Now you can give $4,000 for the primary and the general election. And it's gone up for the statewide level as well. It's gone up from $912 to $5,000, I think, or $4,000 for them as well, I think. But anyway, the point is, who's going to take advantage of that? We don't know. But once again, that has to be disclosed. That will be at the Secretary of State's office, so you'll at least be able to see who is funding candidates, unlike the loophole, dark money, money laundering that goes on that we don't have a clue. We sort of know from the Washington Post investigative reporting that where it's coming from so far, but that's just because of their own investigative reporting. But yes, there will be a lot of that will be interesting to watch. Also, and I'll get to you, I promise. Also, political action committees that are formed, they have to report to the Secretary of State. So that is reportable money. But the huge thing that was done in this bill that raised the contribution limits is it used to be that a legislator could take PAC money, but only up to a certain level. It was like $6,500. And then they couldn't take any more PAC money. That cap is totally gone now. They could take PAC money forever. You also, now I'm not saying this is gonna happen, I don't think it will, but I always use them as the excuse. I'm sure as an Exhibit A, and I'm sure the word gets back to the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, and they don't like me because of it, but it's the best potential tomfoolery that I can see. You could take the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, they have an intricate committee system, numerous committees. Each committee now, legally, can form a PAC. And that PAC could give, $1,000 to a legislative candidate or whatever, and could come from one organization, but with numerous PACs. You could fund almost an entire legislative candidate, frankly, from one special interest. And with that PAC limit gone now. That ain't gonna happen right away, but believe me, when the vacuum is created, it's filled in a couple of election cycles, and some strange things could happen.
And this was the answer to the dark money. It was just supposed
They
to
said,
counteract the dark.
exactly, that was the comment was, well, we got this huge amount of dark money coming, let us raise more money, and then we can counter it. Well, that isn't gonna counter anything, the dark money's still gonna keep
Dark money.
proliferating, and you're just gonna have more money in the system. And the courts ruled that it was legal, and the public financing clean election system, they went to court saying, wait a minute, you've now created such an imbalance between publicly financed and privately financed with the new contribution limits being raised. They needed to have raised the clean election money so that those that didn't want to participate in privately financed, they get some decent public money to make sort of a level playing field. And the courts ruled against the clean elections and said no, that they didn't have to do that. And believe me, the Republicans didn't want to do that. So a lot of mischief and strangeness we're going to see in the next couple of election cycles. Yes, ma'am. You're asking me to really just be so opinionated here with you guys. I think it's just been I'm going to sound like, for you older people in the room, I'm going to sound like Rodney Dangerfield. I don't get no respect. I think the process just isn't respected anymore. I think the trend, particularly when there's been the Republican legislature, okay, I know this may shock many of you, but I am a lifelong registered Republican. When I was in the legislature in the 80s, I ended up, in my last 2 years, I served 8 years, as a Republican majority whip. And I can just tell you that the Republican Party in the legislature back then is not the same. I am today an out-and-out rhino. I will tell you, you've heard my presentation. You've heard my discussion of dark money. You've heard my mention that the Republican Party chairman was an incorporator of one of the dark money organizations. But I'm still a registered Republican. I still was chief of staff in the early 90s for a Republican governor. I was a Republican majority whip, and I'm a rhino, I know. I'm a Republican in name only. I vote Democratic most of the time now. I love the top two primary that lost because independents, in my opinion, are important in our system. They don't have a level playing field. It's hard for independents to run for office, et cetera, which that initiative would have corrected. That initiative is going to come back, by the way. This time it's going to have some big funding from some foundations that believe it will go. They have to wait till 2016, but just wait. Anyway, the Republican Party moved further to the right. It's now Tea Party controlled, but even before the Tea Party was around there, it was still very, very conservative. And when you had a matching Republican governor, like you had with Governor Brewer in particular, they wanted to do things behind closed doors. They wanted to cut their own deals and shove it through, and all they had to do was inform their Republican caucus members, give them little updates of what was going on, and nobody complained except the Democrats and the media. It's just a different world politically, ideologically within the Republican Party. And as long as that ideological element is running the Republican Party and the Republican Party controls the legislature and the governor's office, they don't care that much about an open appropriation system.
How about one more question? Patrick?
So, with the presentation about the governor's budget and considering the election year and quite a number of people wanting to get out there on the campaign trail, what do you think the response is going to be? How quickly do you think they're going to put the budget to bed and get out of session?
It all depends on those closed doors meetings. If they can come to a meeting of the minds, and for the reasons you stated, they want to get out and campaign and raise money. They can't raise money during the session, so it's important that they get out of session to raise money, unless you're running for Congress. Andy Tobin, the Speaker of the House, can't take money for legislative races, but he can take money during the session for his congressional race and still be Speaker of the House. That's just the reality. I think because the governor's budget's pretty conservative, more conservative than expected, that they will, behind the scenes, maybe get something done, and it'll be more of a traditional timetable of getting out, which is usually early May, late April. If they continue to fight like they did last year, then it'll take that bipartisan coalition, and they'll be there till June, as they were last year. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.